Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Cassidy Garson, and this is the life of a writer. Today's topic was inspired by a video I happened to catch this morning. My normal routine is that I will get up and I watch a YouTube video on the Garden Answer channel, which is a nice relaxing way to start the day. The videos are normally Laura working out in her garden, planting things. We also see her husband and her children, and sometimes her mother and her sister, and it's very soothing content. So that's it's a pleasant, relaxing way to start my day. And I've been doing this for many years now. I was doing it before I retired. Actually, I may have started around 2020. It might have been a little bit before that. Anyway, that's not really here nor there. The point of this is that when I was watching my Garden Answer video this morning, I finished and I still had a little time before I needed to start breakfast. So I was scrolling through YouTube and I came across an interview with Shaun Cassidy. Now, if you are not in my age group, in your 60s or so, you may not have heard of Shaun Cassidy, but he was a teen idol in the 1970s, and I was a big Shaun Cassidy fan, to the point where I have multiple albums of his. I was so obsessed at the time that I used to practice writing my name with his last name because that's what teen girls do. I didn't actually date in high school, so all of my relationships, so to speak, were virtual. They were imaginary, which plays into the life of a writer, of course. I had a lot of imagination going on. But let me set a little scene for you. So in the 1970s, albums were popular. I can remember having I think they were 99 cents at the time, going out and buying the latest 45, which is the smaller record. Or I'd have to save up to actually buy a full album. But I would listen to them on my parents' console stereo. And one of the popular styles in the 1970s was Spanish. So my parents had the console stereo that looked like a piece of furniture. It was faux wood of a dark color. Maybe it was supposed to be maple or something. And it had a couple of large speakers where the fabric was red. And then it had, I don't think they were iron, but something like almost like a filigree looking design. Now inside the console stereo, there was a turntable. There was an AM/FM stereo. And there was an 8-track player, as well as spaces to store some albums and a few 8-tracks. I spent a lot of time listening to that stereo as a kid. At the time, my parents were running a business, so during the day and into the evening hours, they would often be out of the house. So I would have the run of the place. And we had a living room with high ceilings that I don't think was acoustically very good, but it allowed me a lot of space to kind of run around and dance and have a good time. So I'd put on an album and I would sing along, or if I was in a more mellow mood, I would sometimes just perch myself next to the speaker and listen to make it sound as though I was hearing, like the voice in my ear, because again, teen girls. So obsessed with Shaun Cassidy. He was not the first Cassidy I had a crush on. Well, I actually had a crush on David Cassidy, his brother, before him. And my crushes go back to the 1960s and Davy Jones and Bobby Sherman. And I started crushing on celebrities very young. But Shaun Cassidy was probably my biggest crush because it was during that period of time, the teen years, where emotions are all over the place. And he was cute. He was safe. I mean, I listened to other types of music. I wasn't a big fan of groups like Led Zeppelin. I listened to Kiss. One of my favorite Kiss songs was actually Beth, which was one of their more mellow songs. So I didn't listen exclusively to Shaun Cassidy, but he was definitely on repeat throughout my teens. And of course, I had the bedroom with the posters plastered all over the walls. But I was so obsessed that I actually convinced my parents to take me to Universal Studios, where they were filming the TV show that Shaun Cassidy was on, the Hardy Boys Nancy Drew Mysteries. I was also a longtime fan of Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys, and read the books well before the TV show came about. And I heard about the TV show from my school librarian because I spent so much time in the library. She knew what I liked to read. So she said, well, there's a TV show coming up. And of course, once I saw the show and latched on to Shaun Cassidy, the rest was history. It combined several of my loves. The Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew, of course. The cute singer, Safe, of course. The interactions, like there would be some drama. There would be a lot of drama, actually, because usually being a mystery series, there was something dramatic going on. Some of them went a little off the deep end, for example, when they got into vampires. Really funny stuff. So if you have not watched the Hardy Boys Nancy Drew Mysteries from the 1970s, you should check it out because it's pretty funny. But I convinced my parents to take me to Universal Studios in the hopes that maybe I might run across them while they were filming. Of course, we had to go down on a Sunday because my parents' business was open 6 days a week. The only day they had off was Sunday, excuse me. They were open Monday through Saturday. And what we ended up doing, since we lived in the Central Valley of California, when they closed the business, we all piled into the car and we drove to Southern California, which is maybe a 6-hour-ish drive. The traffic wasn't quite as appalling in Southern California as it is right now, but it was still pretty busy. We checked into a cheap motel, complete with the 25-cent vibrating beds. I mean, it was a little dodgy. And then the next day, we spent the day at Universal Studios. Now, Universal was not quite a theme park yet, but they had been doing tours of the studios for many years. And they would have props from various television shows and movies and things like that. And you would get in a tram and do the studio tour, and then you could wander around these. In some cases, there were oversized props. They had the van from the Hardy Boys, and we got to see things like dressing rooms, celebrity dressing rooms. And then they had a few shows where they would kind of fit you into, or they would pick someone from the audience and fit them into a TV show, like the $6 Million Man. And of course, one of the highlights of the studio tour was going across the water, so to speak, near Amity Island and seeing Bruce the shark from Jaws, which was, Jaws had come out a couple of years earlier, so it was still huge. And even in those days, seeing the shark in person, it was a little bit hokey, but it was kind of fun too. So this was how obsessed I was with Shaun Cassidy. And in 1978, 79, I believe, I talked my parents into, as a birthday present, getting me tickets to a Shaun Cassidy concert. Of course, they would not let me go alone because the concert was in Berkeley, California. And in the 60s, there was a lot of protesting going on in Berkeley against the Vietnam War and things like that. By this time, it was the late 70s, and things had calmed down a bit, but they didn't want their teen daughter wandering around Berkeley by herself, so I went with my mom. And that was an interesting experience. My dad couldn't drive us and ended up, we took a Greyhound bus from our home to Berkeley, and then we had to go find the Greek Theater on the UC Berkeley campus where the concert was being held. The opening act was the Hudson Brothers, who many of you may not have heard of. You may be familiar with Kate Hudson, and she's actually the daughter of one of the Hudson brothers and Goldie Hawn. So it was quite the interesting night. The Greek Theater, open air, I believe at the time it was general admission, and the tickets, looking back, we would have considered them very inexpensive. I think they were probably something like $14 or $15, which, you know, when you're spending multiple hundreds of dollars on a concert ticket, concert ticket these days, $14 or $15 seems pretty cheap, except, you know, there's also inflation and the value of money and everything else to take into account. So at the time, for my family, that was an extravagant splurge because we bought the concert tickets and we bought the bus tickets. Then once my dad closed the business for the evening, he drove to Berkeley to pick us up after the concert. And it was a whole adventure for him, but that may be a story for another day. With all that being said, the background is now set. I can give you the topic of today's discussion, which is basically the twists and turns of life. So Shaun Cassidy was huge in the 1970s. In 1980, he performed his last concert and took a break. He continued to work. He did a few acting roles here and there, but he was mainly behind the scenes writing and directing. And at one point, he actually was on Broadway, I believe, with his brother David doing the show Blood Brothers. So he, you know, never left the limelight completely, but he was more in the background. He just gave up singing and touring the way he had as a teen idol. And of course, you know, the things that young celebrities do, those kids that grew up working on the Disney Channel or on Nickelodeon shows or something, sometimes they didn't transition into acting as adults either. And it's a good representation of how we have different phases in our lives. So this interview with Shaun Cassidy, after all this long-winded background, they asked him why he had taken such a long break, because now he is touring again. And he said he could see that he wasn't going to be happy touring and, you know, being such a focus of attention as he'd gotten married and was starting a family, and he wanted to have a more balanced life, is my impression. Doesn't mean he didn't still love singing, and apparently, of course, you know, he would sing at home. His brother sang, his mother sang, I think his father sang as well. Mother, Shirley Jones, the actress, and his father, Jack Cassidy, who was an actor. And so this goes to show you how much I still know about him. I can even tell you his birthday, but I'm not going there. Anyway, he was talking about coming back to singing, and he mentioned that he wondered how singers who consistently toured throughout the course of their lives and had to continually sing their most popular songs. For example, one of Shaun Cassidy's early hits was "To Do Run Run." I can only imagine how obnoxious that would become to sing over and over and over the course of decades. And he was saying that he couldn't see how singers could continually sing these popular hits without becoming incredibly sick of them. So he felt that returning to singing at this point in his life was great because he could revisit those old pop hits. He's not sick of them. It's like they're fresh again. And he's had all these other life experiences over the course of his life. And he was talking about connecting with fans now, fans like myself, who were older. We've also had a lot of life experience. And when they come to his concerts now, they connect on a different level, because the teen idol years, the girls were, you know, obviously throwing themselves at him because we were all very hormonal and madly in love with him and everything. So not to say that older women can't swoon over him as well, but probably in a different way than we did in our teens. So he brought up those points, and it really struck me that I'm actually glad now that I did not end up becoming a full-time writer successful full-time writer who actually earned an income and could continue writing. I'm glad I didn't do that in my 20s when I first started writing, because if that had happened, I might have isolated myself away, spent so much time focusing on my books that I wouldn't have had a lot of the very interesting and rich experiences that I've had over the course of my life. The outside jobs that I took, I wasn't thrilled with the idea of going out to work, especially with small kids at home. And it was difficult balancing those things. And that's one of the reasons that writing kind of went on the back burner eventually. But it provided me with a broader view of the world and taught me a lot more about myself. I'm much more confident now than I was in my 20s. However, that being said, I'm not as confident as a writer as I was in those days, because I naively thought that, you become a famous writer just by putting manuscript out and everybody would love it. And, my writing was the best thing in the world, which obviously that's not true of most people when they first start out writing, because you have to learn the craft. So thinking back on all of the things that have happened since I took that break from writing, my little hiatus, I'm actually glad that my life went along that path. Now I'm frustrated at this point, and I think I've mentioned this before, because starting fresh as an older person who was trying to do this earlier in my life, it feels like I should be farther along in the process than I am. So that's my one big frustration. But otherwise, I really don't regret the way things turned out. I did at one point apply for an internship at the Disney Studios. At that point, we had moved back to Nevada, my husband and I and our kids, and taking this internship would have meant that I would have spent a year working down at the Disney Studios away from my family, which would have been incredibly hard because my husband was also working full-time. I didn't get the internship. Actually, I remember I submitted a spec script for an episode of Roseanne with Roseanne Barr and John Goodman. And I still have that script around somewhere. That's what I had submitted as my, I don't know, not really a resume, but my sample writing. And of course, those internships were very competitive, so I did not get it. But coincidentally, that was the same year of the big Northridge earthquake. So not only would I have been away from my family during that year, I also would have been in Southern California when the Northridge earthquake hit. And at the time, I breathed a sigh of relief because it would have been difficult on so many levels. My hope had been that I would get a job writing that would help sustain the family so that my husband maybe would not have to work as hard. And, but I didn't really even realize that the cost of living in the area versus the pay that staff writers made, they probably didn't balance out. And also coincidentally, when I became an archivist, I went to a 2-week training in San Diego. It was called the Western Archives Institute, put on by the Society of California Archivists. And while I was there, I connected with an archivist who worked for the Walt Disney Archives and found out that even though Disney is a huge company and everything, working for them is not as glamorous as you might think. So you can see the progression of me having these wonderful ideas, being really excited to do these things, having some hesitations. Like I said, leaving my family for a year would have been difficult. I could have gone back and forth to visit, but it would have been a hardship for all of us. Plus the earthquake. And then, I don't think I could have made a living as a staff writer, because only certain people achieve a level of success that allows them to buy those big houses in Southern California and things like that. And then, uh, there were other things. I almost had my tie-in novel for the Quantum Leap series published, but they ended the series without publishing my book. But I don't regret that now, because that may have pigeonholed me a little bit as somebody who wrote things like TV and movie novelizations instead of doing my own work. So while I would have loved to have had some of those experiences and actually get those books out there, or get that job working on a TV show, I'm happy I didn't have those experiences, because I was around, even though I was working outside the home during the day. I was home with the kids at night, and my husband and I shared, caregiving and bills, and we didn't have the added stress of working separately in two different locations. And I learned a lot from rejection, basically, and I think that's a good thing. So thank you, Shaun Cassidy, for giving me this moment to think about the way my life has gone and how things could have turned out very different. And I'm happy I'm happy I ended up on the path that I've been on. Now I can devote time to my writing, because I am basically retired and on a pension. So there is continual income that I earned while working, but it's given me the time to focus on one of my first loves that I wanted to go back to. So something for us all to think about. If you are regretting some things that didn't turn out the way you hoped they would, look at them in a different way, because you might find that life has a way of working out for the best in a lot of cases. Now, that's not to say I believe in fate or karma. I think subconsciously we make choices that we might do something like me submitting that spec script. Maybe I didn't work as hard on it as I could have to make it a better product, to make it something that they would have accepted and pulled me into that internship. Maybe working with an editor at a big publishing house was the lesson I needed to learn, not necessarily the experience of getting my book out there into the public. So I think I've learned and grown a lot from both my successes and my not so successful moments. And I think that's something for all of us to keep at heart, and especially as we get older, because we may look back and feel like we have a lot of regrets, but maybe those regrets weren't such a problem after all. So again, as usual, if you've hung out with me throughout my ramble, I am obviously not scripting these, and the idea for this video came about this morning as I was watching that other video. So my thoughts may not have been as coherent as I would hope they would be, but if nothing else, I hope you enjoyed my little stories about some of the things I got up to as a teenager. And maybe if you have never seen or heard of Shaun Cassidy, you can look him up, because he is a wonderful singer, as are his mother, Shirley. His brother, David, was also a great singer, and it brought back a lot of memories. The funny thing is, I was so madly, wildly in crush with him as a teenager, and now I look at him and, aging, he's still very handsome, but he looks like a member of my family. So, because we both have an Irish background, I assume, with the last name Cassidy. Oh, and also, in case you couldn't tell, my pen name, Cassidy Carson, the Cassidy comes from Shaun Cassidy. So instead of taking it as my last name, I decided to use it as the first part of my pen name. Oh, life is wild, but it does come full circle after a while. And it's kind of fun to reflect back on these things, but I really have to get back to work. I'm close to finishing my current work in progress. I don't know if this will be a runaway success. It's book 2 of a series. The first book hasn't gotten much attention yet, so we'll see what happens. I've noticed that JT is gaining more popularity as he puts out more books in his series, so I'm hoping as my series progresses, people will start picking them up a little more as well. But in the meantime, like I said, I need to get back to work. So thank you for sitting with me as I rambled about my memories of Shaun Cassidy and thought about how differently my life could have turned out. I hope if you didn't enjoy this, that maybe you learned something, and, you know, we'll see what happens tomorrow, because I will say that tomorrow I am leaving the house for most of the day. So any video I post will probably be very short. I may do it at the end of the day, so don't expect a lot from tomorrow's video, but who knows, I might have another interesting inspiration. So thank you once again for checking out my channel. I'm Cassidy Carson, and this is The Life of a Writer.